are these people?
You mentioned war crimes earlier, Joe.
Yep. Yep.
Which we should talk about why are war crimes? Why are war crimes? War crimes. Multitude of reasons, but you wanted to talk about this.
Yeah, it's important because the Fourth Geneva Convention talks about protections for civilians in times of war. And in the introduction to this conversation, which was almost 3 hours ago, we talked about why war crimes become war crimes and why innocent civilians need to be protected. And when there are rules of engagement to war, unfortunately, because there are combatants that will violate these rules and commit atrocities that go against the rules of engagement in a war. And these atrocities are war crimes or crimes against humanity. Now, Collin Reef, I know I sent you a bunch of links in our private Twitter chat about all of this, and we wanted to go over a couple of these rules that are most applicable for what's happening in the Middle East. That way, when somebody says there's a war crime, you know where the government document that talks about these war crimes is coming from. Now, we talked about the Fourth Geneva Convention. There is, I think, 162 articles of the Geneva Convention. We are not going to go over all 162 articles. We're not doing that because we don't have that kind of time. But I don't know if you can pull up Article 32, please. That's possible.
There you go.
Prohibition of corporal punishment, torture. If you engage in this is a war crime. This is a war crime. Can't do it. And if you scroll up to the top, it talks about international humanitarian law.
Yep.
Can't do it. Let's look at Article 33, please.
I think I have that up here.
Should be right there.
Hold on. Go away, ShareX. There we go. This one right here. Yes, I accept the cookies. I love cookies.
Collective penalties. We've talked about that. That's collective punishment. Collective punishment is a war crime. Can't do it. Can't do it. How about Article 49? We should have that available. There it is. Deportations, transfers, evacuations, moving people from one place to another, even if it's within the territory. It's a war crime. So when Israel says, yo, y'all got to move down south because we're going to bomb you.
Right.
War crime. War crime. By the way, another war crime that I did not mention with the notes here, but I'll go ahead and discuss it, is using noxious gases or toxic chemicals in a war.
White phosphorus.
White phosphorus, tear gas.
Well, we
also
designated white phosphorus that, right?
Correct.
Because we were using it on our own troops, and our own troops got injured. And similar to Agent Orange, it's similar story. So,
correct. And yeah, that's exactly it. And those types of weapons, they're crimes against humanity. They're war crimes. Can't use them. We can't do it. Article 50 of the Geneva Convention.
Yep, I'm getting to it. Hold on.
Have that available. Thank you.
I can do shortly. Article 50 on children.
Children.
There you go.
Children. I don't think much more needs to be said about this. Children. And we've seen the unfortunate death of children.
Too much.
Way too much. And my biggest fear about all of this is that not only are we going to become desensitized to the loss of life of adults, but moreover, we're going to be desensitized to the loss of life of children. Children that never get an opportunity to live out their dreams and go to school and play with their friends and grow up to be adults. Article 53. Do we have that available, Reef?
Yes, we do.
Prohibited destruction.
Any destruction by the occupying power of real or personal property belonging individually or collectively to private persons or to the state or to other public authorities or to social or cooperative organizations is prohibited, except where such destruction is rendered absolutely necessary by military operations. That's the article. So don't blow up
Essentially, you can't.
hospitals, that
Right.
kind of stuff.
You don't blow up. Right. You don't blow up personal property. That has nothing to do with the war. And something that I think needs to be discussed with my 10-point objectives for this protest, I think number 11 will be war reparations. There have been plenty of examples of war reparations that have been paid to people who have been in wars and lost everything. We might need to look into that, especially for the Palestinians. Can we pull up Article 55, please?
Yes, sir.
Food and medical supplies for the population.
Yeah, no siege warfare.
Correct. If you cut off food, if you cut off medical supplies, that's a war crime. Article 56 is also an important one. Hygiene and public health. This was certainly more applicable about 2.5 or 3 years ago regarding the vaccine. And there weren't a whole lot of places where Palestinians could have gotten vaccinated. And Israel was purposely withholding vaccine doses to the Gaza Strip and the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip.
Partially because
do that,
Pfizer and Moderna have plenty of labs in Israel and they make money off that. Nothing like crony healthcare over there as well. So
correct. Let's take a look at Article 62, please.
I think I have that ready. I have 76
Wonderful.
ready. Hold on. Let me go back. You said which one?
62.
62.
It's above 63. There you go.
There it is. Well done, Reef.
Yep.
Individual relief. Think about this in the context of aid that's not being delivered to people who need it the most.
Right. Which is kind of honestly why I've been questioning this whole time in terms of what Biden is saying, and I think a lot of that is what the queen in that TikTok was saying, they had to change the narrative in terms of Palestine because they saw the government is seeing, the overwhelming, I would argue, the overwhelming support, in terms of how people feel towards Palestine, which honestly, I think has been interesting to kind of see that evolution. I think really within the last 3 years in particular, I would argue, again, George Floyd probably kind of kicked off in a way of what we're kind of seeing now, because people have been able to get more educated and a little more in the know in terms of the true reasons behind that conflict. Well, people have been talking about Palestine forever, but I think, people have been doing a lot better and kind of putting 2 and 2 together since. I think especially within the last few years that, but, you can't say now, it's hard to kind of be, as much as they're going to try, it's hard for people to say, we have to support Israel because Hamas is this, but then people like throwing that back and basically being like, no, it's not a question of Hamas per se. It's a question of what have you been doing to the Palestinians for the last almost 8 decades.
5 to 8 decades, yeah.
And I would argue longer than that, that you haven't spoken to. So what's how we are going to account for the responsibility that us and the British government, the West has in their hand in, determining the fate of an indigenous group in the Middle East. So,
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, there was, I think, one more that we wanted to talk about was Article 76. Did we discuss that one yet? Article 76
we're about to.
Was the treatment of detainees. Self-explanatory. If you have detainees, war crime, not good.
Mm-hmm.
Article 77 is also important, and this was part of what I spoke about in the previous segment regarding releasing hostages. Hand the people over. There's a bunch more articles that I sent in the comments.
They have been doing, by the way.
I know. But there's guys, and I guess to all our viewers here, this is there's a lot wrong with all of this. I'm going to do my best to not both sides of this. I'm going to do my best to not water this down or sanitize it. But this entire situation is terrible. Across the board, there's no two ways around it. No one deserves to die. No one deserves to die. And the fact that we have governments around the world that are willing to support this is a huge problem.
Yeah,
I would argue I think that's
the problem. Yeah,
it is the problem. Like,
Joe Biden says, if there wasn't an Israel, we would need to invent an Israel.
When Hakeem Jeffries calls Israel the sixth New York borough or some bullshit like that.
Right.
Like, I think it was.
Yeah.
Right. Like, when we're willing to give more money to an apartheid state versus Lahaina, which is our country.
Yes. Or Flint,
Like, we just forgot. That happened like a month or so ago. Like, they only got $700 per family.
One-time payment.
Right. Just, just to cover your expenses. When people essentially lost their homes. And I would argue, more importantly, the land on which their ancestors built.
Collin, and here's the thing: it's not just the home, and I understand that; it's their livelihoods.
Right, but that's what I mean. That was my implication of that. It's like their livelihoods were gone.
Yeah,
and we just gave them $700 to. So Lahaina is pretty much a microcosm of what we're seeing in Israel. Like, it's the idea of people with money and means forcibly, say what you want, but Pasta was here a few weeks ago and spoke about this, forcibly taking over land, property, you name it, for themselves, to the detriment of the local people who have lived there.
Well, it feels like they've given Israel qualified immunity, essentially. It's
right, and that's
they tell you, well, do you condone the violence against cops? And I'm like, well, it becomes a flight or flight situation when the guy's going to tase you, then shoot you, and then beat you to death again after that. I don't know if I'm completely safe in the hands of IDF trained police, let alone someone with a darker complexion. you know? So,
I mean, well, I'll say this, and Joe, you've been witness to this. You probably were a part of this. Again, going back to George Floyd, when you had militarized cops who were willing to tase you, gas you, beat your ass in the name of protest. Like, I still have the footage. I think I still have that footage on my Instagram page. I don't post really much anymore, but like I have a clip up there on my page where we basically got bum rushed
yeah.
by the cops, you know, because we were protesting against what happened to Floyd. And so, you know, it's it's the reality that we live in, but I just feel like with Israel, they just seem like they have carte blanche to do whatever they want. And we're just like, yeah, we'll give you money in order to continue essentially war crimes, you know, without accountability from the government, and I argue from the UN, where the fuck have they like what the fuck have they been doing
Well, we can
or
tell you
whatever
what they
else, right?
do. You talk about the Hague and where war crimes, and those same war crime tribunals, the only things that they have been used for is to attack African leaders for the last 8 decades. Like, not one single European dictator has been tried since World War II there. Like, you know,
Well, Reef, that's not true because
it's
remember,
not
listen to
entirely.
what I just talked about.
Yeah.
Listen to what I just talked about with the former Yugoslavia. There are plenty of war criminals. They weren't necessarily leaders of countries,
There was a
but there are
chat.
plenty of war
There's
criminals.
a thing in the chat. I just wanted to, while you mentioned that, about a book by, where is it at? Hold on. George
Yeah, I saw it.
Smamuli, called "Bombs for Peace: NATO's Humanitarian War on Yugoslavia." Just wanted to shout that out. But anyway, continue.
And yeah, let me and I want to make sure I say this properly. I know more than a few people who eventually became refugees when they were living in Sarajevo because of the war in Sarajevo.
Sure.
Plenty of friends. I have several, more than a few friends of mine who are Bosniaks. They're Bosnian Muslims,
Yep.
and I'm quite close with many of them. And yeah, let me just. It's difficult to see something like this happening all over again.
Yeah.
And Colin, you mentioned the protests. You mentioned protests and the police weaponizing American citizens' ability to protest. I'm going to talk about this again because it's important to talk about. Some of you might have seen the interview when I was at the Andrew Brown Jr. protests in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, on April 29th, 2021. Some of you all might have seen that video where I was wearing a yellow vest and had a t-shirt with these 4 words on it. Some of you all saw that. And of course, the legend, our dear brother and friend and comrade, John Farina, was there. He was filming everything. John, you all know John because John was the person that filmed everything that happened inside the Capitol building on January 6th. Every second of it.
Also, Convo Couch, who we know, and they had to literally sue people for using their footage. They're just starting to see money from that. So, but yeah, no, yes, he's one of. Yep.
My point with the interview from Elizabeth City, North Carolina, what you all didn't see during that interview, I said there are cops that are standing on the roof. What I didn't tell you all is that the cops had guns pointed at us. I didn't bother saying that in the interview because I didn't want to scare people off. The cops had guns pointed at us. I could see it. I could see it. And if you notice in that interview, we started walking away from the building. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. But getting back to what I was saying a couple of minutes ago, this, we need an end to this. We need an end to this. There's been no one needs to die. No one needs to die. And the people who in the summer of 2020 that said, hey, Black lives don't matter, all lives matter. If all lives matter and we're going to purposely discount Black lives, then we can't go ahead and discount anybody's lives in the Middle East.
Right.
Especially Palestinians who have been under a brutal Israeli regime for nearly 8 decades. The life of a Palestinian is just as valuable as the life of an Israeli person. The bombing of that refugee camp, I can't imagine anything worse than that. Some of you all don't know my entire history. You all just know me as a DJ, and I, played a few countries, traveled around the world a little bit, sold a few records. What some of you all don't know is that I have a couple of master's degrees, and in both of my master's degrees, both of my graduate schools, the University of Baltimore and Wake Forest, I've worked with refugees. I've worked at refugee resettlement agencies at both stops. So I'm particularly sympathetic to the plight of refugees. Especially when I was in graduate school at the University of Baltimore, I was a case manager intern for the International Rescue Committee. The majority of the refugees I worked with were either from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is going through their own genocide right now, which is not being talked about in the mainstream legacy United States media. I also worked with loads of Eritreans and Ethiopians, but the majority of refugees I worked with were Syrians. The majority of them were Syrians. And I remember the names of most of the Syrian refugees I worked with. And when they would come to the orientation and they would sit there with their families and the interpreters, I would hear their stories, obviously through an interpreter, because I don't know Arabic. And by the way, Syrian Arabic, from what I remember, is slightly different than your standard Arabics. You have to ask for a Syrian Arabic interpreter. You can't just call up an interpreter and say, "Can I have an Arabic interpreter?" It won't work. You need a Syrian Arabic interpreter. And some of the testimony and some of the stories that I heard from the refugees and what they had to deal with and what they had to go through to get to the United States. It's unspeakable. Absolutely unspeakable. So to bomb a refugee camp, there are special places in hell for people who bomb refugee camps. It just is. And when people like Piers Morgan or Wolf Blitzer, who works for CNN and has loads of connections to, was an editor of an APAC newsletter, if I'm not mistaken. When he gets on television and says, "Yo, come on now, we can't be bombing refugee camps," you know something's terribly wrong. Not just terribly wrong, but morally wrong. This needs to stop all the way across the board. I'm hoping and I'm praying that this protest leads to something bigger than this protest. I'm hoping this protest will wake up people's consciences around the world, and that we're no longer indifferent to the suffering of people, especially the Palestinians. I'm hoping people will wake up. I'm hoping people, in the words of Bob Marley, will get up and stand up. I'm hoping people will protest. And I don't want this to just be a weekend thing and we forget about it on Monday.
Right.
I'm tired of that. I'm tired of boutique activism.
Yeah.
I'm tired of it. I understand the need to protest. I understand the need to communicate. I understand the need to amplify messages, especially messages from people who can't speak for themselves or people whose messages cannot be disseminated for a variety of reasons, as we've outlined earlier on tonight.
Yep.
This needs to stop. It needs to stop. It needs to stop. And I'm hoping what happens on Saturday in Washington, D.C., and in London, and in Brussels, and in Madrid, Spain, and in Amsterdam, and in Copenhagen, Denmark, Stockholm, Sweden, wherever it is, Denver, Colorado, Vancouver, British Columbia, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and they had protests in both of those cities too. And I know people who attended both marches. There's a march that's taking place this Saturday in Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada. And yes, I've been to Thunder Bay, Ontario. It's not exactly the middle of nowhere, but it's almost close to the middle of nowhere. And I have some people I know who I'm quite close with up there that are going to be at the marches there. People I know in Vancouver are going to be showing up and showing out. Supposedly there's a march in Los Angeles this weekend. If you're going to be protesting, just don't protest just because you want to see a free Palestine, because that's not enough. There has to be more than, go ahead.
Or just to be seen, just to be seen, to seemingly be like you're on the right side of history. Like, if you're going to do it, be about it fully in the fullness of what you're being called to do. So, as I said earlier, it's a matter of how you're going to take that message of what you're hearing and how you're going to translate that into action when you go home. And I'll say this, more than likely, you're not going to get that support. Because as I said, we'll probably will talk about this for a while, I would imagine. But eventually, you know, it's going to be the next news thing. I can imagine might be China, Taiwan on next on the docket.
Yep.
You know, I can well, I imagine probably that's probably going to be the next thing if I'm going to make a prediction right now. And we're going to forget, but Israel will continue to get that funding. Israel will continue to bomb Gaza and the West Bank. Palestinians are still going to be terrorized to, you know, to the point of, you know, like basically be wiped out.
Yeah.
And we're going to forget about it.
And Collin, and we can't forget. And just as you so eloquently said, my brother, about 45 minutes ago, when you said our Jewish brothers and sisters constantly remind us of the Holocaust, and they should. We should be reminded of it so it never happens again. That also extends to Black people and the enslavement of Africans in the United States. We should constantly be reminding America of what happened to our African ancestors.
Right.
And specifically for me and you, Collin, our Caribbean ancestors in the Caribbean and any indigenous population that has faced brutalization, marginalization, and genocide as a result of a colonial power. We should constantly remind people about what happened to marginalized people so it never happens again. And it relates exactly to what's hopefully will happen this Saturday. We want people to remember this. We want people to remember this. We want people to never forget what is happening right now. If you forget your history, you are doomed to repeat it. Unfortunately, people have forgotten the history of what happened to marginalized and brutalized and oppressed people around the world. And it's happening right now. And many people in our quote unquote world governments or the global community are choosing to turn a blind eye to this. That's wrong. We as citizens of countries, and of course, me and you, Collin, we're citizens of multiple countries. So that's a whole other conversation.
International black
But
men. Don't worry about it.
that's who we are. That's who we are.
Starring Idris Elba.
You already know the vibes.
I feel you, dog.
The vibes. Yeah. But more importantly, as human beings, it's human beings that have the ability to reason, that have the ability to think for ourselves and to feel any sort of sympathy, empathy, and compassion. We can't let this slide.
Right.
We can't. We can't.
I agree.
On
that note,
I think we can call it a night.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, we got to get back on that fight again tomorrow, so you know.
Right. As always, I mean, it's always a pleasure. I mean,
yeah,
to be very fair to you, I think for Reef and I, this is actually good for us because we've been kind of going hard and actually really prepping, you know, in terms of getting stories together and kind of talking about it amongst ourselves and then sharing it out to our audience. So I think for you, and like when we were prepping last night, we would just like, you're a talker. So
yeah, like, okay, I'm just gonna let him go.
Like, yeah, so but it's always good. Like I always feel good when you come on because
I appreciate that.
Because you know, you are a teacher in many ways. And so for me, I can almost just kind of sit back and enjoy because I know you will bring information that is thought-provoking and, you know, challenges, you know, the establishment, but it's always in terms of love and it's always in terms of truth.
Yeah.
And even tonight, you know, we had, you know, not to say we disagreed, but, you know, I think I definitely felt like I was strong in certain aspects of our conversation, but we were respectful. But I think, you know, we were able to have that respectfully and,
I agree.
You know, I'll care for each other, but knowing, you know, where each other's heart is. So, yeah, so it's like I said, it's just, you know, like when you asked, can I come on? I'm like, yeah, like, but it's always, you know, it's always a treat that you're on. My only thing is that you should be, and I mean, you travel a lot. So, you know, like, so I think your voice needs to be highlighted a lot more in the space, but we are grateful that when you do give us that time, you give us a lot of quality stuff that we're able to kind of pull. And as I said, you know, we got plenty of clips from you that we will definitely clip out, and we got enough good information that we can share out for the next few months.
Thank you.
I think in terms of what you wanted to talk about has been, I think it's very poignant in you know, in terms of the situation that we're in right now.
Yeah.
The question, I think, as we kept saying tonight, and this will be the true test as we move forward over the next year, how would that translate into who essentially becomes our president?
Right.
That will be the thing that I think we'll all be watching for.
I agree.
But
we appreciate you coming on. It was great.
Yeah.
You know,
appreciate you guys.
so
I appreciate you guys. And
next
and
week,
real quick, and just to
go
kind
ahead.
of, real quick, guys, and just to kind of piggyback what you were saying, Collin. And first of all, I appreciate you more than you could possibly ever imagine. It's I know we're both busy people. You're teaching, I'm traveling a lot, but there's a brotherhood and a kindred spirit between us. And I think a lot of that is because our backgrounds are incredibly similar. And for the listeners, Collin and I, neither of us were born in the United States. Both of us were born in England. I came to the United States when I was about 14 or 15 months old. You came to the US when you were 11, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Both of my parents are from Trinidad.
Oh.
Your dad is from Trinidad and mom is from Barbados, or is it the other way around?
Windrush babies, pretty much.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly correct. Yeah, we are both descendants of Caribbeans, Afro-Caribbeans who were Windrush. So
Yeah.
when Collin and I specifically talk about the Caribbean diaspora, the African diaspora, and we relate that to the enslavement of American descendants of slaves in the United States, and we talk about indigenous populations around the world, whether it's the Maori in
New Zealand,
or the Ainu in China, in Japan, or the Aborigines in Australia, or the Uyghur Muslims in China, or the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, or Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, or members of the First Nations communities in Canada, or Black people and Native Americans in the United States. There's a perspective that we have as a result of our heritage and our histories and our backgrounds that, quite frankly, no one else in independent media has. So if you're watching Collin and Reef on a weekly basis, please continue to support them. Support them, because this is these conversations, this sort of dialogue, this sort of discourse is incredibly important, especially in an age where narratives are being pushed and we're seeing more propaganda. And I don't think people understand how propaganda works. Propaganda doesn't work because you are interested in changing somebody's mind or you're interested in making an emotional appeal. Propaganda works because people just get tired of figuring out what is truth and what is trash. They get tired of figuring out what's real and what's fake. And this is why these protests are so important and why we need to continue the pressure. We need to continue the pressure. We need to continue speaking up. We need to continue raising our voices. We need to continue speaking out, because the minute we remain silent, that's when propaganda sets in. That's when we get physically and emotionally tired of dealing with this. That's when propaganda sets in. And the bigger the lie, the more people will believe it. And we can't let this happen.
Agree.
Where can people, so if you don't mind,
I don't.
Two things.
Yes, sir.
Where can people find you?
Yeah.
And kind of follow up to that, are you going on tour anytime soon? And if so,
where can people
find you on the road?
Yeah. Social media is all the same. Joe Nice DJ, like you see in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Joe Nice DJ on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, SoundCloud, Mixcloud. That's me. That's me. My next show is November 18th, Los Angeles, California. The venue has not been determined yet, but I know I bought my plane ticket. I know there's a flyer for the event. I'll post that up over the next week or so. I love playing music. It's what I'm passionate about. But I find it more and more difficult to entertain people when we're in the middle of an existential crisis. We're dealing with an existential crisis. We're dealing with an ecological crisis. We're dealing with a biological crisis because COVID is eventually going to come back. We're dealing with a potential financial crisis if we're not already in one now. And we're dealing with the human catastrophes around the world. And we have people in government that aren't willing to address any of these crises that we're dealing with right now. I'm finding it more and more difficult to travel around and play shows, knowing that all of this happening all over the world is going on right now. But it's my job, and I'm going to continue to do it the best I can. And I understand that liberation comes from creation. And that's why the arts are so important, because the arts typically come from a people who understand culture and they understand counterculture.
Mhm.
Typically, most people involved in the arts are anti-capitalist. There's, especially as a DJ, there's the best DJs, and I've said this before in some of the DJ classes that I've taught, and I'm going to be teaching a DJing seminar around the corner at the University of North Carolina in the next couple of weeks. We might even videotape it, we'll see. But I've said that the best DJs give the people what they want before they know they need it. The best DJs give the people what they want before they know they need it. And in order to do that, you have to tap into something in the crowd, and you have to have some sort of understanding with people. You have to empathize, sympathize. In the words of Michael Jackson, we have to rock with you all night. And that rock with you isn't necessarily just laying in bed together. You have to rock with somebody. You have to feel somebody. Do you see what I'm getting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that the ability to feel somebody emotionally directly relates to what we're dealing with right now.
And you can't
It directly
stop
relates to what's happening.
till you get enough.
You don't stop till you get enough. One last thing. I know there's a lot of us out here that wake up in the morning, we turn on the
Feeling
news,
like-
we look at our phone, we'll watch France 24 or France 24 for those who speak French. We'll watch TRT World, we'll watch DW, Deutsche Welle, we'll watch Telesur, we'll watch Al Jazeera or BBC News or Euronews. We won't watch CNN, MSNBC, NBC, Fox. It's terrible. We don't watch any of that. We'll try to watch international news broadcasts. We see the despair. We see the catastrophes taking place around the world. Don't become desensitized to what's happening. Don't become desensitized to it. There are days where you're going to be confused, where you're wondering, what am I doing with my life? Why am I here? Why is all this happening? It was the great Marvin Gaye that once said, what's going on? What's going on? But Marvin Gaye also said, let's get it on. He also said that.
Yep. He did say that.
And let's get it on. He did say that. And he wasn't talking about just in the bedroom either. He was talking about, let's get it on. Let's fight for something that's bigger than us. Let's fight for something that's important. Let's fight for something that matters. He meant
You guys
that
still
too.
live?
Let's get it on.
Yep. I agree. You know, especially when you need that sexual healing. Well,